Welcome back, everyone, as we are finally ready to dive into part 5 of Napoleon's first campaign from Epic History TV. We did the first 4 parts to this a while back, and I'll put a link down in the description that'll take you back to episode 1 so you can get caught up if you haven't seen those first 4 episodes, as well as the link to the original content. Epic History TV puts out some of the best historical content on this platform. Definitely check them out if you haven't already. I want to give a shout out to Daniel in Haifa in Israel, as well as, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Achim in Munich. Achim, I hope that when I'm in Munich in a few weeks that you'll have an opportunity to stop by and say hi and maybe we can hang out a little bit. I am going to be announcing where we're going to be when we're in Munich and Salzburg and Vienna, so that if any of you who are watching are in those areas and you want to stop by and just kind of say hi or even join us in part of our journey, you are more than welcome to do that. Would love to meet you. So let's go ahead and dive into this. Napoleon, Italy, Part 5.
January 1797. A new year, but familiar problems for 27-year-old General Bonaparte, waging war against the Austrians in northern Italy. He has the great fortress city of Mantua under siege. And after a narrow victory at Arcole, he's once again driven back the Austrian armies, trying to march to its aid. But the French army of Italy is in a ragged state. Troops have not been paid for weeks. Their uniforms are disintegrating. Their shoes are broken. And above all, they're hungry.
So remember that at this point, the army of Italy, even though they're seeing the greatest successes of any of the French armies, is really an afterthought for the French leadership, right? They sent Napoleon, this young artillery guy, to lead this army that was poorly equipped, poorly fed, poorly paid, poorly constituted, just to kind of keep some of the armies of their enemies occupied in Italy while the real fighting went on in the north. But Napoleon's showing everybody that even with this ragtag force, he's able to win. But that can only last for so long. I mean, your army's got to be fed and got to be equipped at some point, especially as you win victories and the enemies are starting to realize that they're up against a formidable opponent. And so they're going to start concentrating more and more of their energy and their equipment and resources against you.
One of Napoleon's major concerns is the wretched state of medical care for his men. The hospitals lack everything. Our wounded are lying on the floors and in the most horrible state of destitution. It's not just a question of saving lives and getting wounded men back to their units.
Morale.
Medical care affects morale.
Yep.
As troops going into combat want to know that if the worst happens, they'll be looked after.
Yeah, put yourself in the position of a soldier, a healthy soldier in Napoleon's army. If you see that this is how our wounded are treated, this is what I have to look forward to if I'm shot, you're a lot less likely to stick your neck out there. You're a lot less likely to take chances, to do anything that's going to possibly put you in that position too. Your buddies are back there and your mind is occupied with what's happening to your friends and your fellow soldiers. This is so vitally important, and Napoleon recognizes that.
Conditions are much worse for the Austrian garrison of Mantua, commanded by Field Marshal Wurmser. In 4 months of siege, 9,000 soldiers have died from disease, wounds, or the effects of malnutrition.
Look at that number. A third are fit for service, right? And this is the danger in war at this time in history in general, but especially if you're under siege, is the health of your army, but also of the civilians.
Survivors live off horse meat, civilians off rats and dogs. Even these miserable rations will run out by the 27th of January, just a few weeks away. The clock is ticking. The Austrians must relieve Mantua by that date, or lose the city. And with it, the war in Italy.
That's a fair request to make, right? The enemy's shifting his forces from the north down here to face the real threat that they see now in Napoleon. France has got to do the same, or Napoleon, I mean, the best general in history is not going to be, and Napoleon's in that conversation, obviously. No general can win against the combined might of the enemy if he's not getting the support he needs.
Napoleon, having received just 7,000 reinforcements, prepares to meet Alvinci's advance. He will not only be outnumbered, he doesn't know where his enemy will strike. And Napoleon must hold one division back to cover Wormser's garrison. It's commanded once more by General Serrurier, recovered from his long illness. Augereau's division watches the Adige, while Massena guards Verona.
And this is where intelligence is so vitally important, right? You have to spread yourself out to guard against any approach of the enemy, but you don't know where the enemy's going to come in force. And so knowing how the enemy's forces are arrayed is going to help you to make your decisions. If you know they're all coming, for example, down this center path, you can concentrate all your forces there. But if the enemy is able to disguise that and he can surprise part of your forces with his whole force, game over.
The Northern Division has a new commander. Napoleon has sacked Vaubois for his poor performance and put in his place General Barthélemy Joubert. He is a hard-working, brave, and exceptionally modest commander, and, like Napoleon, just 27 years old. General Ray is in reserve, south of Lake Garda. General Alvinci has received 14,000 reinforcements and orders to relieve Mantua as soon as possible. He is eager to march, but heavy snow and the late arrival of equipment and supplies delays his advance until the 7th of January.
Imagine that, snow helping Napoleon for a change.
The first columns on the move are Provera and Berlich. But their offensive is merely a diversion intended to draw Napoleon's attention away from the main threat, which will be coming down the Adige Valley.
So there you go. There is where the concentration of forces is going to be. How quickly does Napoleon discover this, and how quickly can he move his main force to counter that?
Divided this force into 6 columns. Their mission is to envelop and destroy Joubert's division at Rivoli and clear the path to Mantua. But Rivoli is a strong defensive position. They must hit it hard and fast before the French can respond. Napoleon, assuming any Austrian advance is still weeks away, has traveled to the Papal States with a column of troops commanded by Colonel Lannes. They intend to put a little pressure on the Pope, who continues to stir opposition to France. However, as soon as he receives reports of enemy movement, Napoleon races back to his headquarters at Rovabella.
So it's an interesting observation here that Napoleon is not only, this shows you how his mind works, he's not only thinking about the military situation, even as a young officer who's not in any way in the higher echelons of French government, he's thinking about the political situation as well. He's thinking about how putting pressure on the Pope can affect the political landscape. And this just kind of shows you how his mind works. He's not only a great general, he also shows some real skill when it comes to politics and diplomacy.
By now, Alvinci's forces have also begun to advance, but serious planning failures quickly emerge. Lusignan's first column, on the right flank of the advance, has orders to cross the slopes of Monte Baldo and attack Joubert from the rear. It's soon clear that these orders are wildly optimistic, dreamed up by staff officers who'd not seen the terrain. The peak of Monte Baldo is more than 7,000 feet high. Its slopes are covered in deep snow and ice.
Good luck with that.
The paths are treacherous, even more so after dark, and there is no firewood for making camp. Only by taking a wide detour can Lusignan make any progress at all, whilst losing 200 men to exhaustion and exposure. Meanwhile, the second and third Austrian columns reach the French outpost at Ferrara. An initial attack is repulsed, and following their orders, they wait for Lusignan's column to appear before launching a second attack. However, Lusignan's column is not yet in sight.
And remember, what's the plan? This is shock and awe. This is about speed and surprise, and you're losing the element of that.
Alvinci's plan relies on swift, bold action. But just 48 hours in, it's falling apart. At Roverbella, Napoleon ponders the incoming reports. He knows that Joubert's forward outpost is under attack at Ferrara, that Massena has repulsed an Austrian attack on Verona, and Augereau faces a sizable Austrian force near Legnago, poised to cross the Adige.
So if you're Napoleon in this case, again, what's your intelligence? What is your plan here? Where do you think the main body is? You've got to make a decision. If you get it wrong, you're done.
Is Alvinci using the same tactics as before, making his attack from the east? Then, a second report arrives from Joubert. His scouts have detected an enemy column marching around his flank. He has no doubt that he faces a major Austrian attack and has begun withdrawing his forces to Rivoli.
So there's your intelligence. Who do you trust? Now Napoleon has to make a decision. Can I trust Joubert, this young, new commander that's out on my left wing?
The report I have given you is exact, he tells his chief. Be assured, the enemy will make every effort to throw me onto the blockade of Mantua. The enemy's plan has been unmasked, Napoleon announces, and issues a flurry of orders. Massena is to march immediately to reinforce Joubert. Augereau is to send him cavalry and guns, while the rest of his division keeps watch on Provera. Ray is to move up to Castelnuovo. Serrurier is to be on high alert for an attempted breakout by the Mantua garrison. While Joubert, the youngest and least experienced of Napoleon's divisional commanders, is instructed to hold Rivoli at any cost, and assured that help is on the way.
Time and time again throughout Napoleon's career, what we're going to see is that his ability to manage his commanders, his ability to quickly issue orders and quickly move, spread out forces and concentrate to take on an enemy is going to be really kind of one of the genius elements of his ability. And we're seeing that yet again here.
After giving the Austrians a bloody nose at Ferrara, Joubert has extricated his troops overnight, and taken up a defensive position around Rivoli. Napoleon arrives around midnight and immediately sets out with Joubert to inspect the enemy's positions. The weather had cleared and the moonlight was superb. I climbed the different heights and observed the lines of enemy fires. They filled the country between the Adige and Lake Garda, and the atmosphere was ablaze with them. One could easily distinguish 5 camps, each composed of a column. Until reinforcements arrive, Napoleon has just Joubert's division, 10,000 men, to hold off 24,000 Austrians.
So for the Austrians, what do you got to do? Again, it's about surprise and speed. Well, you've lost the element of surprise, but you still can attack and hit them with everything you've got. But as I'm looking at this map, if I'm just kind of thinking out loud, because I don't know how this battle goes, I see this column here that's going to be pretty easy to defend against because you got the river on one side and you got mountains on the other. So they're not going to be able to hit you with a wide force there, just maybe a few companies at a time. And then these other columns, they've got to come up and over these heights and then down into a valley where I feel like they're going to be able to cover them well with artillery. So it seems like a pretty good defensive position if you are facing a vastly superior force.
But Alvinci will help to even the odds by ordering Lusignan's first column to attempt a wide outflanking march to cut off the French line of retreat. And Napoleon decides the main road to Rivoli, which passes through a steep defile known as the Pontari, can be held by a single regiment supported by entrenched cannon.
That's wise, it's gutsy, but it's kind of a Thermopylae situation, right? This is kind of like, holding the hot gate with just 300 Spartans and a couple of thousand other Greeks against a massive Persian force, because you've got that narrow place through which they can attack. So this is you have to give credit here to his division commander, this young kid who's new, right? And I say kid because I'm 46, so 27's a kid to me. He's chosen his ground well.
This leaves more manageable odds of 9,000 against 12,000 in the center. But Napoleon wants to push out his defensive line to hold the slopes that mark the edge of the Rivoli plateau.
So now you're spreading out. So I get, that he wants to do that. You're gonna spread yourself out, which means it's harder to reinforce with good interior lines, but it's better ground, so I get that. You've got big open plains here. So the same thing is true as was here, just on a greater scale.
At 4 a.m., General Vial's Light Infantry Brigade advances through the darkness. They drive back the Austrian outposts and take the San Marco Chapel. They're followed on their left by the rest of Joubert's division. But the French pushed too far.
Story of my life is pointing out when people press too far. We see this time and time again all throughout history. And it's understandable, right? You would think, well, wouldn't people learn not to do that? Well, it's easy to say when I'm watching an animated map 200 years after the events, right? It's much harder to do when you're on the ground and you're trying to hold command and control and your men are pushing the enemy forward. It's very natural they're going to kind of go and keep going. There's that kind of half-joking statement that gets made in the movie Gettysburg when the 20th Maine charges down Little Round Top and they drive off the Alabamians who have been attacking them after running out of ammunition. And the guy comes up to Chamberlain and says they're on their way to Richmond. They're going to Richmond. And obviously they weren't going to Richmond, but you get the idea. When men win that victory and they run off the enemy, they keep going, and they often go too far.
Skirmishes break out along the line with heavy fighting on the heights of San Marco. Napoleon had not wanted to start the battle so early, but the combat escalates. At dawn, the Austrians attack the plateau in force. The French 85th Demi-Brigade is outflanked and routed by Liptay's second column.
Uh-oh. That's a problem.
The 29th Light, on its right, is forced to retreat, and it looks like the French line is crumbling. But the 14th, on their right, fights tenaciously.
Berthier.
It's an intense infantry battle across broken ground, vineyards and walled gardens, with sudden charges, hurried withdrawals, and countercharges. When the Austrians overrun a French battery, an officer demands, "14th, will you let them take your guns?" His troops mount a ferocious charge that routs the Austrians and reclaims the battery. By 9 a.m., Massena's troops have begun to arrive. They take up position on Joubert's left. The buckled French
And I just noticed here that you've got a force of Austrians that are going down on the other side of the river. How is that going to play into things? They're going to probably run into the French reinforcements.
line is stabilized. But so far, the French have only faced half of Alvinci's 6 columns. One by one, the others now join the action. Vukasovic's 6th column is on the far side of the Adige River. But its guns cause havoc among French troops holding the Pontari. Under this covering fire, Royce's 5th column charges up the narrow road and in fierce fighting storms the French entrenchments.
So we really think of the idea of covering fire, suppressing fire as a 20th century thing. It really kind of comes into the small unit tactics of World War II. But we see this throughout history, and there's an example of it there. A great example from the American Civil War is the Battle of Shiloh, where you have the area known as the Hornet's Nest that's being held by the Union. And they're holding out against repeated frontal attacks by the Confederates. But what eventually does them in is this massive artillery barrage from like 60 guns that's known as Ruggles Battery. The artillery itself is not doing a lot of damage to the lines, but it's causing the Union men to duck down to avoid being hit by the artillery, and that allows them to get encircled. And so you have that here. It was great to hold that area with one brigade or with one regiment, and you would have been okay if it was just these men, but you get these guns up here on these heights firing down on you, and you're done.
This advance threatens the entire French right wing with encirclement, and a retreat begins. Moments later, gunfire to the southwest reveals Lusignan's 1st column has reached Affy, poised to cut off their escape.
Austrian plan's looking good at the moment.
The French situation is desperate. They are outnumbered, surrounded, and under heavy attack. Napoleon's staff look anxiously to their commander.
At this point, a lesser man might have said, you know what, let's pull out of here and save the army. What does Napoleon do?
Wondering what miracle can save the army now.
That's cool, man. That is cool. So cool.
Sensing victory, General Alvinci and his staff ride forward to urge his infantry on. Napoleon remains calm. He knows Alvinci's center columns are near exhaustion and that they have no cavalry and little artillery support. He identifies Royce's column as the most immediate threat and orders Joubert to send every man and gun he can spare for a counterattack. General Leclerc and a 21-year-old Captain Lassalle then charge with the entire French cavalry, just a few hundred horsemen. Under this onslaught, the lead Austrian troops are driven back into the gorge. Here, they collide with the rest of the column coming up. Cavalry and infantry jammed together, some pushing forward, others trying to escape. Joubert's men pour fire down on them from the overlooking ridge. The final straw is the devastating explosion of an ammunition wagon. Austrian morale breaks. The survivors flood back down the road to safety. Napoleon now turns his full attention to the centre, where the exhausted Austrian columns have become spread out and disordered. The sudden appearance of French cavalry, supported by infantry and guns, sparks panic and a mass rout. Alvinci, who must have thought himself on the cusp of victory moments before, must join in an undignified race to the rear, spreading further alarm among his men. By 1 p.m, the bulk of the Austrian army is in headlong retreat, leaving Lusignan's first column
cut off
in an awkward position. Completely isolated, he begins a fighting withdrawal. But the arrival of General Rey's brigade in his rear triggers a rout. Fewer than half of his 4,000 men escape.
Wow. So it was a gutsy, ambitious plan, but if it fails, you've put one of your units in a difficult position. Austria's plan was a good one. You can't really fault the Austrians for poor generalship here. And this is one of the important distinctions when you're comparing some of these generals across eras, right? So like comparing Napoleon to Robert E. Lee, for example. Robert E. Lee wins some brilliant victories on the battlefield at places like Chancellorsville, but he's facing a really subpar leadership on the part of his enemies. Same thing was true in 1862 during the 7 Days battles. Anybody other than McClellan in command of that Union Army, and they probably take Richmond. Napoleon's facing solid generals on the other side in many situations who have pretty solid tactics. Napoleon's just brilliant.
Through tenacity, courage, and good fortune, the army of Italy has turned a grim situation into an astonishing triumph. French casualties are modest. Austrian losses are devastating.
Wow.
Over the next few days, 5,000 more Austrians are captured as they struggle back through the mountain passes.
He's doing all of this while outnumbered and while using a poorly equipped, poorly fed, poorly paid army.
Napoleon will not be there to see it. He's received news that Provera has crossed the Adige and is marching on Mantua. It is a chance for him to strike one more blow against the enemy and to seal the fate of Mantua. Leaving Joubert in command at Rivoli, with orders to renew the attack at dawn, Napoleon races south with Massena's division. Provera has no clue of the disaster that's engulfed Alvinci's army, nor that the wolves now gather for him.
So again, this just shows the brilliance of Napoleon, right? His ability to bounce forces back and forth and to quickly communicate to those forces. While the Austrians, the left hand has no idea what the right hand's doing at this point.
He pushes on to Mantua, shadowed by Augereau, who snaps up his rear guard, 2,000 men taken prisoner. With just 7,000 left, Provera's only hope is to break through the French siege lines. First, he tries to attack San Giorgio. Formidable French defenses and a powerful cannonade stop him cold. The next day, he launches a coordinated attack with Wurmser against French forces at La Favorita. But Napoleon has now arrived with Massena's division from the north. Wurmser's weak, starving men are forced back into the citadel, while a determined charge by the 57th Demi Brigade smashes into Provera's flank. With Augereau approaching from the east, Provera faces impossible odds and surrenders with his entire force.
Wow. Just like that.
Wurmser's last hope of rescue has been crushed.
You have to surrender.
He puts off the inevitable for 2 agonizing weeks.
Jeez.
Until, with all food exhausted, he finally accepts terms for Mantua's surrender on the 2nd of February.
Now again, remember what happens in this situation. When you've had to besiege a city for months like this and they haven't surrendered, very often the terms are pretty harsh, if not downright unconditional, and just wipe out everybody that was inside and resisted. But I have a feeling Napoleon's going to be more generous than that.
Escort will return to Austria. His 16,000 remaining troops become prisoners. Austrian losses in the campaign reach a staggering 44,000 men. After 8 months, the siege of Mantua is over. A victory that will soon be celebrated on the streets of Paris. But it is General Serrurier, not Napoleon, who takes the formal Austrian surrender. His commander-in-chief has already departed to take on his next opponent, the Pope.
This is what's crazy about Napoleon, and eventually will get him into trouble, right? Is there's no end to his ambition. There's no end to his thinking about the next target. So he's won an incredible victory, and most people in this situation, especially with a pretty poor army, would say, okay, you know what? We have thrown back the Austrians time and time again. We've been fighting for months. We finally have our big prize of Mantua. We're good. Let's sit and rest and wait and see what happens. No, he's already on to his next target.
From Rome, Pope Pius VI has once more been agitating against the French. And so Napoleon marches south with 9,000 men to explain the new realities of power in Italy.
To explain.
At Faenza, General Victor's division sweeps aside papal forces, and Ancona is taken without a fight. The subsequent Treaty of Tolentino forces the Pope to give up Romagna, as well as 30 million francs and 100 works of art.
Wow.
Belatedly, Napoleon's victories persuade the Directory to back him in force.
There you go.
French armies stuck on the Rhine are ordered to send him reinforcements. Their 34-year-old commander, another rising star of the French army, is congratulated on his brilliant winter crossing of the Alps. His name is General Jean Bernadotte.
Father of the royal family of Sweden.
On the 10th of March, with 70,000 confident, seasoned troops under his command, Napoleon goes on the offensive. He sends Joubert to invade the Tyrol, Massena to advance up the Piave Valley, while he leads the bulk of the army on the most direct road to Vienna. The enemy is scattered and demoralized. Even the appointment of a new commander, the Emperor's own brother, Archduke Charles, fails to restore morale. Charles is regarded as a military prodigy. He's 2 years younger than Napoleon and has defeated the armies of both General Jourdan and Moreau in Germany. But he does not have enough troops or time. He fights a delaying action at the Tagliamento River, but it ends in disaster when Bernadotte surrounds and captures 2,000 Austrians 10 guns and 8 standards.
The juggernaut.
The French pursuit continues, with Massena covering Napoleon's northern flank. He arrives at Tarvis in time to block the Austrians' retreat. In 3 days' fighting, the French take another 3,000 prisoners.
This is just, the timeline of all of this is just incredible, right? This is not even 2 months after they've taken Mantua. And now they've already gone south and dealt with the Pope and taken some land and money and artwork from him. And now they're marching on Vienna.
Napoleon's troops outmarch and outfight the Austrians at every turn. But his situation is more precarious than it seems. The other French armies are only just crossing the Rhine, while his own supply lines are now overextended and vulnerable. Rather than withdraw, Napoleon continues to advance, while proposing to Archduke Charles that they open peace negotiations.
So this reveals a little bit of Napoleon's awareness of the situation, right? He, if he were in a stronger position, I doubt he's opening negotiations for peace with Archduke Charles. He's thinking, I'm taking Vienna, I'm taking Prague, I'm taking Innsbruck, I'm taking all of these cities that are in our path. But he knows the situation, and so he's probably counting on the fact that Charles doesn't realize just how precarious the situation is. But this is true throughout history as well. The further you advance, the more precarious it gets, because those supply lines require a lot of manpower to be able to protect and to man and to continue to push things forward. And we see this in wars throughout history. Armies that have won victory after victory, but they get stalled because of the length of their supply lines.
The Austrians accept. 2 days later, both sides agree an armistice, and peace talks begin at Leoben. After 5 years of conflict, Napoleon's dazzling advance into Austria has brought the War of the First Coalition to an end.
Don't worry, there's like 5 more coming.
So ends Napoleon's first campaign, almost exactly a year after it began, 380 miles away on the shores of the Mediterranean.
Time for Egypt. That was before it all started.
Negotiations at Leoben become the basis for the Treaty of Campo Formio, signed 5 months later. The Austrian Netherlands, roughly modern Belgium, formally passed to France. The Venetian Republic, invaded and systematically looted by Napoleon's troops, is divided between France and Austria. So ends the 1200-year history of the Serene Republic of Venice. The famous horses of St. Mark are among its many treasures dispatched to the Louvre in Paris.
It's amazing how many countries cease to exist or have their origins in or changed in some dramatic way because of Napoleon Bonaparte. Think of how much of modern history owes its state of being to these events.
To join its rapidly expanding Italian collection. The French part of Venice joins its other Italian client states to form a new Cisalpine Republic. The author of its constitution, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Loves to have his hand in the politics.
It's an illustration of how far the 27-year-old general has come in just a year. Having waged one of the most brilliant military campaigns in history, many would say his best, he now dictates terms to kings and popes, summons new states into being, and nurtures his status as the most celebrated military commander in Europe.
Hard to argue with that.
He has achieved all this thanks to formidable intelligence, relentless hard work, and inspiring leadership, which he has used to forge a unique bond of trust with his men.
Yep.
He's had luck, too, along the way, and been ably served by a group of brilliant officers, many of whom will be with him for years to come.
And we are going to get into Napoleon's marshals at some point, because that's a fascinating story in and of itself. No man is an island. Nobody gets to great heights of success without it being on the backs of many other lesser known figures. And Napoleon's absolutely true. The fighting he has to do in the many places, especially throughout Europe, as these wars or these coalitions go on, is not possible without brilliant leadership by some of his subordinates.
For Napoleon still has many extraordinary things to achieve. His Italian campaign is just the first chapter in one of the most astonishing lives in history. Did you know?
Awesome. That was good stuff. As always, Epic History does a fantastic job of presenting everything. They really do so well with that. If you haven't already, I did something new yesterday. If you haven't seen my video on 1776, I hope you'll check it out. Seems to be pretty popular as far as not necessarily the views, although it's doing pretty well as far as my original content goes. But a lot of great comments, a lot of great feedback on some things I can do to improve, because I do plan on doing more of that. So I'll throw up a link here in just a minute if you want to check out my video. It's actually based on a talk I gave for a group of the Sons of the American Revolution that seemed to have been really well received. I turned that into a podcast, and then I took the script from the podcast and used that to make the video. So I hope you enjoy it. If you haven't already seen it, check it out. I'll throw the link up here in a second. I want to give a shout out to Parker Jelke and Weston Green. I don't have your locations, but thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.